Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here, and I want to thank you for joining us again today on Feminine Roadmap Health and Wellness. I'm continuing my series with Dr. Laurel Mellin. She's a health psychologist. She's a clinical professor of medicine at UC San Francisco, and she's the creator and founder of Emotional Brain Training. And today our topic is brain-based approach to overcoming depression. I know there's been a lot of conversation in my email box from different PR companies about the epidemic of depression and the medicines and all of the things that are going on. And so this is a really powerful conversation. So Dr. Laurel, thank you again for joining me today and bringing such life-giving, life-changing information to my tribe.
Gina, I love being with you, and this is such an important topic, and it's so controversial. It's so laden with meaning. I mean, even the depression definition and all, it's really, really hard to get a handle on it. So someone will say, I'm depressed, or I'm clinically depressed, or I'm atypically depressed. And what I hope we can do here is talk about the fact that there's a lot that's not known, but we're changing. And the way we're changing is we're saying the whole field of psychology needs to be brain-based. Okay? So brain-based psychology is what's going on in your prefrontal cortex, the only control we really have, our neocortex. And how is it regulating the circuits in our emotional brain? That's essentially the field. And up until this point, you know, the first wave of diseases were infectious diseases. And then finally we got antibiotics and sterilization and such. And then what happened was a lot of chronic diseases where people were living. So there were chronic diseases and there were psychological diseases. And the chronic diseases you could do tests for, which we got really good at doing medical tests for different diabetes or heart disease. But in psychology, there was a real problem because there was essentially, all problems are physiologically based. And that's why the emotional brain circuits are so important. Everyone should know how to rewire them. Everyone should know how to shut them off. Everyone should know how to spiral from stress to joy. And that's just hasn't happened yet. It's on its way, and it's inevitable that it will. But the idea is that in psychology, they didn't quite know what to do. And so what we did is we just developed diagnostic criteria based on characteristics and different diagnostic standards. And essentially it wasn't grounded in the body and in chemicals and physiology. So that's just no longer okay. And everyone pretty much knows that, and we've been moving toward that. But what I was hoping we could do today, Gina, with the time that we have, is offer a few concepts that no matter whether it's your friend who's depressed or that you've been told that you're clinically depressed or you don't even want to deal with any of that, you're just shut down, or you're just having a blue mood, how can you put that in the context of the brain? And then based on how you put it in the context of the brain, how can you help yourself overcome it? And that's what I'd like to be able to just sketch out a few key ideas about the brain that will help people take charge of understanding yourself, not judging yourself, and moving toward a solution that really works for you. So one of the first things you do with depression and brain-based health is to stop some of the secondary stress. In other words, just someone telling you you have a diagnosis, sometimes that's really reassuring. You say, oh, I get it. I have this particular condition. Other times it feels like it's hard to hear, or you're really not sure whether it's right or not. But the idea is that being stressed about being depressed is not going to help you. So the idea is once you know, okay, there's something going on with me, the first thing is to be sure that you've used the tools of EBT enough and had someone to talk to. Oftentimes, if you're really, really stressed, you just need someone to listen to you or to give you advice if you ask for it. But the idea is depression is so common right now, and it's not well understood that being stressed about it, you got to kind of process your emotions until you say, okay, for who I am right now, I'm going to move forward and do the best I can to create joy in my life and get all the support that I need. And I'm going to talk about support a lot in just a moment. So the first thing I'd like you to do is go back. If you're not familiar with emotional brain training and brain-based health, there are 5 different stress levels in the brain, or brain states. And that's the momentary state you're in. And so if you're feeling really overwhelmed, lost, confused, immobilized, can't think, that's brain state 5. And 4 is a little above that, where you can connect a little bit, but you feel really bad. 3, you're in a state of semi-connection, not doing so great. 2, better, but there's not a lot of positive emotions. And 1 is really connected with really elevated emotions like love and compassion and joy. So the first thing to start thinking about with the depression is, you could say, I've been told I'm depressed, or I think I'm depressed. Am I at a state of 3, 4, or 5? And I'm at a set point, or 3, 4, or 5. So the set point is just the habit. If you spend long enough in 5, your habit's going to be 5. The solution is to get the habit up to a 3, 2, or 1. And why is that? Because right here, see brain state 3 right there? Okay, this is the level where something called the vagal brake, which is our way of having a social engagement system so we can connect with ourselves and others. It comes on right at 3. Anything below 3, if your set point's at 4 or 5, you're going to want a distance. You are going to probably treat other people like objects. Now, this is not because you're a bad person. It's because we all have 5 people inside of us, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, whatever brain state we're at. But at 4 or 5, it is virtually impossible for you to have a loving give and take relationship. You'll be more likely to give yourself to someone who you'll let yourself be abused or neglected. Mm-hmm. So you'll be more enmeshed, or you'll distance, and you'll listen to this voice you have in your head, and you will just be so judgmental. The question is, this is normal for brain state 4 or 5. There's nothing wrong with you. You've been triggered by a circuit, and you're in the lower part of the brain, and that's natural. So we're trying just to get up to 3. And that's why medications are really helpful in one-on-one psychotherapy, to help get us over that 4 or 5 set point, back to that place where we can begin to connect and heal. And the reason for that is that depression is actually a loss of hope. And the hope and the joy that I'll talk with you about in a minute is really about love, because we are mammals. We are love bugs. I have a yellow lab. Her name is Tammy Rose, and she's just all big love bug, Well, you and I are love bugs too. If we don't have a lot of circuits blocking that love at the bottom of our brain, we want love, we need love, both to give and receive love, and we can't do that until we're at 3. So the first thing is no judgments about being in that state of depression, and a lot of external support, whatever it takes that you need to feel better. Medications, one-on-one therapy, definitely EBT. And you get up to a 3. Once you get at 3 at set point, you're going to find yourself getting much better, much faster. So we're just trying to get out of the 4 and 5. Does that make sense, Gina?
Yes, it does. It's really helpful to go through that, because I was confused by the brain states at first myself. And so now I understand that the brain states are where you could be at any point in the day. And the set point is actually where your habit is kind of stuck or is at the moment. I mean, exactly. As a lifestyle sort of.
Right. Well, exactly. Very nicely said. The idea is they're interactive. Like, I went through a period where I was at set point 1, and then my mother died. I was the caretaker of my father. My children and my whole family was organized around my mother, and my mom was just, really, really, really loving to my kids. And I was a single parent and didn't have enough resources, time, money, anything. And all of a sudden my mother's gone. I'm the caretaker of my father. My father's dying now. And I mean, grieving. And so I went right down into being depressed. And depression had been one of my mood circuits. If you get into EBT, you learn how to move through the stress to joy, but there's a mood that you have that is a habit. Okay. Mm-hmm. So for example, if you get depressed because just depression is a response to stress. a meta-analysis of depression studies showed that as much as there could be a genetic component, primarily it's repeated episodes of stress, early life stress, adverse childhood events, and then they just get piled up on. So we've got these circuits down there of hurt and disconnection. Then later things bother us more because they bring up those circuits from the past. And so here I was trying to grieve the loss of my mother. My set point went down probably to a 4. And one of the things that happens is if depression becomes your mood circuit or the go-to or the habit of your brain to go to depression when you're in stress, you need to rewire that circuit. I had a circuit. I get my nurturing from being depressed with a little bit of self-pity thrown in there, right? And so you want to rewire that circuit so it's not your knee-jerk reaction to go in that depressed state. You also want to get really good at switching out of that depressed state with just the app and with a small group or coaching. But you stay with it to get every time that you spiral up just a little bit and get just a little bit of joy, it's going to change your brain. And over time, you're going to move your set point all the way up to set point 1, which is wired for joy. This is extremely important because the original tendency to go to depression comes from stress. And those circuits will always be little bits of those circuits there. So some people use medications. Some people just know that, if they go through a tough time, they better use the EBT tools and also get one-on-one support or group support. Okay, so there's always some traces of those circuits that are going to be left that could come up now and then. Well, what's the smart way to not trigger those circuits down there? Well, it's to get your set point up. So if the set point starts moving up and you work your way up so you have a set point of 1 or even 1.5, you're just not going to be activating those old circuits from the bottom of your brain as often. So it's not enough to just get yourself a little bit up. You want to do that first and foremost, and then keep going up until you really can say that you have an abundance of the higher order rewards as part of a purposeful life. And when you're brain state 1 or in joy, you've got an abundance of, sanctuary, authenticity, vibrancy, integrity, intimacy, spirituality, and freedom. So I'm saying this is a journey, and it's really a wonderful, joyful experience, even though you're processing emotions and sometimes it's work. But I want to show you here on this particular slide. It's a wonderful study that really looked at the prefrontal cortex of people who are depressed and then controls. And the left prefrontal cortex is associated with positive emotions and the right with negative emotions. And in this study, you can see, looking at the right and the left between the controls and the people with depression, is it turned out that the brain function was that people with depression were joy insufficient. There'd been repeated episodes of stress so that essentially the brain was not getting the joy that we needed. So if you're super depressed, let's say that your depression is significant enough that you have a set point of 5, which is really, really common, clearly you're going to want to talk to your doctor about medications. Clearly one-on-one, you're going to want to be in a small group, an EBT group. But the idea is you're going to be lucky to be able to go one little tiny joy point. There was a participant the other day who said to me, it took me 6 weeks to be able to score a joy point, but I just found my first joy point and I love it. And she was so excited. So in other words, you're training your brain to move through that stress instead of getting stuck in it and get back to joy. And the brain just learns by experience. Just keep feeding it little tiny surges of that state of connection, and your brain will begin to get in the stress habit. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And on my experience with EBT has been that the shifts are happening on such a deep and subtle level that the proof of it comes as another situation arises, and I find myself behaving differently, responding different. I'm responding versus reacting, and it's really an amazing process.
Well, often people who have had a lot of disappointments in emotional connections, particularly early in life, and this insecure attachment and some of the traumas, what happens, this is to me very amazing. What happens is that the emotional brain is encoded with circuits, self-regulatory circuits early in life. They're downloaded from the people who take care of us. So again, if the person that was taking care of us didn't, my mother, for example, was thinking oriented, I was really emotionally feeling oriented. We didn't quite connect. So some of the circuits I got were not necessarily optimal circuits. And then her mother had more disconnection from her than she had with me. So these are intergenerational circuits. And that's why, as much as you want to be angry that you're in a situation that you've got some circuits in there that are just essentially making you miserable or making you feel powerless or negative or do things that you regret, the fact is these are intergenerational circuits. And what you can do is say, I want to grieve my losses, but I want to say, okay, it's a new age. We have neuroscience now. We have brain imaging, and we know that you can change your brain and that it's very low tech. It's you're going to learn how to process your emotions back to joy. And that's what I'm suggesting, is to have a lot of patience for yourself and to know that if your set point goes down, it can go back up. Key to get, if you're at set point 5, key to get medical support and one-on-one support. Never stop taking your medications without working it through or changing them slowly with your health professional's assistance. But the idea is, know that you have it in you. I want you to look at this slide right now that says stress resilient circuit. Oh, yeah, there we go. You have these circuits. These are homeostatic circuits. You already have a lot of them. You're just going to re-enliven them. You're going to strengthen them. You're going to make them dominant in your brain. And for all people, when these circuits are operating, you're present and aware and you're doing hard things. Life will always be difficult because our evolutionary biology wants us to be charged up, to take on new pursuits, to take on new challenges. The brain wants us to learn, change, and grow, and that means, difficulty. So the issue is life is always difficult, but you're going to be able to move through it, stay connected, trust yourself. And on the other side, instead of judging yourself, making a list of every single thing you didn't do perfectly, you're going to say, oh my gosh, I don't have to be perfect to be wonderful. That was pretty good. And there's going to be a big smile on your face. You have those circuits right now, and you're just going to build on them. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to cannibalize the stress reactive circuits. See those stupid circuits? Those circuits were encoded in your brain, and it's not your fault. But because they change by us using our prefrontal cortex to connect with lovingly and powerfully with our emotional brain, you're going to be present when you're to yourself when you're 4 or 5. You're not going to judge yourself, and you're going to use tools. I'm going to show you how to use a specific tool in a moment. And that circuit that's stress reactive, that's taking you spiraling down, you're going to weaken it. And over time, you're going to break it. And so it's not going to block your joy in the same way that it did. You see that, Gina? Right there?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what we're getting. We're getting rid of this toxic stress. We're spiraling up to the joy. Now, what I want you to do right now is look at this series of slides. This is all the way from what life is like. And we're just going to use set points right now, because if you're thinking about how you want to proceed in overcoming depression, let's just try to get a sense of which of these brain states is really your set point right now. And you can see how very different the thinking is, the feelings, the relationships, the behaviors. They're very different. So you could be at 3. You could actually be at 2 and just really never have learned how to make yourself happy. Or maybe you have a few circuits that say it's my job to be miserable all the time. And so you find yourself not really getting the full measure of joy that you need to do what you need to do. Think of joy as the gas you put in your tank. Because when you're full of joy, you can give back to others much more. So the first step is to clear the stress so the joy's there, and then watch out what you're going to do. Just watch out. It's going to be wonderful. If you're at 3, remember that's the stage I mentioned before where you're saying, oh my gosh, I'm kind of wobbly here. I'm kind of worried. I'm kind of negative. And yeah, that's right. And it's hard for me to connect with people. Well, it goes downhill from there. So when you're at 4 or 5, you're going to be distancing and judging and hiding and isolating, which is really terrible for the brain, but you can't help it because essentially the brain's closing down, is telling you you get your safety from shutting off and isolating, or you're going to be just a willing victim of so needy for people to validate you because you can't find the love inside. That's just going to be how it is. So if you're more toward the 4 or 5 and have a symptom that you would call depression, that's really important because those stress reactive circuits means that when they're doing their thing, essentially your thinking brain is offline and this reptile is owning you for that period of time. And you need to get out of town. In other words, you need to get out of Dodge. If this was an old cowboy comedy, essentially you can really feel like you're boxed in. And so err on the side of as much external support as possible. It's not a reasonable expectation when one of those stress reactive circuits are operating that you're just going to be able, when people say to you, really, you should walk. Well, yeah, sure I should walk. My 4 or 5 state is telling me I can't move, let alone walk. Or if I am going to move, I'm going to become an exercise addict. It's all about extremes at those states. So when you're at 4 or 5, you have to have endless patience with yourself. You have to have a huge willingness to get external support. And the combination of that external support, whether it's a therapist or getting medications or somehow getting out of the house and getting around someone else, they're going to help you bolster your brain state. And if you can even get a few minutes up at 2 or 3, you're going to say, cool, the world is a lot better than I thought. And yes, things are getting better. And so you need those sparks of connection and joy. So definitely see that when you're down here, you might say that your feelings are unbalanced, overwhelmed, but please appreciate that all areas of life are impacted by the stress. So instead of defining yourself in terms of your diagnosis, you want to get an idea of how best to overcome the problem by understanding your set point. And if the set point is down here, as much as you might be focused on the depression as being your problem really is that you're at set point 4 or set point 5. And the solution is to get up to 3 and then 2 and then 1 while you're wired for joy and you won't settle for anything else. Now, when you're at set point 1, does that mean you're happy all the time? No, that would be dangerous. You got to go down to 4 or 5 and break up some of those circuits and continue to evolve. But you do have a secure connection inside. You can find that love that you need inside, and you can have more to give. Because the whole idea is, one of the things that happens at 4 or 5 is what you most need is to be able to give back in a way that fulfills you, but also stop short of neglecting or abusing yourself. That's what happens at 1. So the giving and receiving of love can't happen as easily at 4 or 5. So that's why we're trying to get that set point up so that fulfillment can happen much more often, even though life is still difficult. And so you want to get those joy points. I want to share just one really, really good stopgap with you. I want you to take for a moment just to think about what your set point is. And on the EBT app, I want you to learn the tool for your set point. I mean, isn't it just practical? The truth of the matter is, if you spend most of your time at 5, you better be a rock star at the 5 tool. If you spend most of your time at 4, well, the 4 tool is the one for you, and same for 3. So, but I'm going to teach you actually another tool that's part of the 5 tool right now. 5 tool is called the damage control tool. And what I want you to do is to just practice it a little bit with me for a second. If you were to open your app, you'd find that it first starts by saying, take a deep breath. So this is kind of like a safety net tool. And so take a moment and just do some belly breathing. Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, or in any way that feels comforting and comfortable to you. And take just a moment to do it. And then when you're ready, the second step is proprioception, which is body at one. So put your shoulders back, your chest out, your chin slightly up. If you like, just pet yourself a little bit, stroke your arm, something that feels nurturing to you, physically connecting to yourself. Okay. And then warmly observe yourself. Now, if you're at a full-blown 5, that's a full-blown stress response. The reptile's in charge, and you're not going to be able to do that very well. So, perfection is not the issue right now. Just try to see, oh yeah, here I am, depressed beyond belief. This is really, really hard. And see yourself a little bit. Now you can use the 5 tool, but I'm going to ask you to do it in a slightly different way. When you're really, really stressed, that kind of safety net, there are 3 messages that the reptilian brain is telling you. One thing it's telling you is to judge. Now, some people, it depends upon your variety of circuits that you have in there. Some people judge themselves, some people judge others, or some people go back and forth. But believe me, with the cortisol going there, you're going to be judgy. Also, the brain is telling you it doesn't matter whatever happens. Do whatever you want to do. You can harm yourself and other people as much as you want to. Don't worry about it. Just do whatever you want to do. No impulse control. And the last thing that the brain will tell you in that state is that there is absolutely no hope. This will last forever. The roof is caving in. Life as you knew it was over. And that's just how it is. There's just no way out. You are totally and completely trapped. Okay? So it basically says judge, harm, and this is for good. There's no way out. So there are 3 basic statements of damage control, the tool for brain state 5. They are do not judge, minimize harm, know it will pass. Won't feel that way, but it will pass. Do not judge, minimize harm, know it will pass. And I'm teaching you an advanced form of this tool right now as a safety net. So after you've taken a few deep breaths, body at one, warmly observe yourself, what you're going to do then is you're going to find one of those phrases. Remember, your emotional brain wants you to feel better. And so what you naturally are attracted to use, sounds like it would feel good, is going to be best for getting out of brain state 5 and getting you up to a 4 or 3 or maybe even a 2. Okay? So you're going to say, well, what would be most rewarding to me to say? Would it be do not judge, minimize harm, or know it will pass? And I usually go with do not judge. But some people say, I want to say minimize the harm. And others say, know it will pass. Just choose one and say it to yourself several times until you feel complete. And then go to another one. Like if you choose judge, then you go to minimize harm. There's going to be some harm here, but I'm going to minimize it and know it will pass. Fact is that it feels like it's going to be forever. I'm doomed. I'm completely doomed. That everyone that knows me just wants to get rid of me, that I'm no use on this planet. It's cortisol speaking. It's not true. People need you. People love you. People rely on you to be there. So you're going to say, yeah, this will pass. This will pass. And that's what I want you to do, is have that safety net tool there so you know you always have it and you can pick up the phone and connect with someone, because that's what the brain really wants. It wants love and it wants connection. So have you had a chance to learn your set point tool yet, Gina? Have you had a chance to look at that?
Yes, I have. I've been practicing it daily. It's really a great way for me to have a place to go to when I'm feeling a little bit out of order with myself.
When you don't know what state you're at, you say, well, it's probably my set point tool. At least I can give that a try. So yeah, that's great. And then essentially you can say that, cool, I used the damage control tool. I used it, the full-blown damage control tool. I used it. Pretty good. Making progress. Small steps are really important. So the idea is, a lot of the science I've just talked about is on the ebt.org site. And you have to appreciate that you are now rewiring your emotional brain. This picture right here, I really love. There's one of a woman as well on the site. And what I want to begin to leave you with is, before we go back and close, is that I want you, when you wake up in the morning, to imagine yourself wired for joy. So in other words, take all of those blocks in the bottom of the brain, and even after you felt really horrible, what I call it, when I get in that state, I call it feeling bone-chillingly alone. I wake up in the middle of the night, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, I feel bone-chillingly alone. And if you can stay with the feelings, what happens is the prefrontal cortex, because there's so much oxytocin when you're at brain state 5, if you just can stay connected to your body, just stay connected with your body and appreciate how terrible you feel, as you bear down on that and begin to connect more deeply with yourself, there is joy. There's just even a speck of joy with that oxytocin. And it feels like a spiritual shift, it feels like an emotional shift, and it feels like something that you accomplish for yourself. No one else can do that for you. No one can do it for you. So I want you to appreciate, in the back of your mind, just as a little spark of truth, is that I want you to imagine yourself not only able to move through the anger, the numbness, the depression, the upset, all the things that are part of a great life without judgment, and spiral up to that state of joy that's all about love, all about hope, and all about the possibilities for your unique life. And if you can do that, imagine yourself wired for joy. You're creating a circuit in your brain of hope and well-being. And that's what we're doing, step by step, day by day. So wake up in the morning and say to yourself, even though it doesn't feel true to me right now, I know what my job is. I am creating joy in my life, and I have the tools and the community and the support day by day to experience that little bit of moving through stress that came from hard times, difficult trauma, early disappointments, and later upsets. It's part of a great life, and you're clearing away those circuits so you have the clarity to appreciate how beautiful your life is and how much you have to offer others as well as yourself. So we start my day saying, I am creating joy in my life. Oh, I am? Yes, that's exactly what we're doing, because we have the tools to do it. And that's the nature of the human spirit, to come through really, really tough times that are absolutely almost impossible to imagine you're happening in your life. And on the other side of that is a level of personal respect and a sense of purpose that you wouldn't have any other way.
So as you're sharing these really life-giving tools, I was thinking about joy. You said joy is the gas you can put in your tank. And it's such a hopeful message to know that we can get to joy. The question that I had for you is, if someone has been struggling with depression for a long time, do they have difficulty recognizing joy?
Absolutely. And I think that's why I started our conversation, David, saying judgment is just out of here. The minute you start judging yourself for not having joy, it breaks my heart. Because first of all, the reason that it's hard to get joy is because initially in life, you didn't get the self-regulatory tools to get through stress, to be angry. And anger is a really big important part of depression. I'll come back to that in a second. But to have those negative emotions, move through them with grace and without shame to get to your joy. So those basic processes in the brain that we're installing with EBT weren't there. So, and then when you don't have that processing, bad things happen and it all piles up. No place for shame. The other part of that is, if we're not raised in a secure environment, it's not going to be safe for us to express our anger. Right. Either anger in our home was only used in rage or destructive ways, harmful ways, or people repress their emotions and it wasn't okay to have robust anger. And anger is really an emotion of power. It's the only powerful approach emotion in the brain. And if we can't protect ourselves by being angry and having boundaries, we're going to have much more neglect and abuse. So oftentimes with depression, if there's any missing skill, because there's 4 major skills in the brain for grieving: anger, sadness, fear, and guilt. All of them are included in the 4 tool and the 5 tool. So you learn to get your emotions to flow. But anger often is the missing feeling. And if you just let your anger go, it will get stuck as rage and it'll be destructive. But if you learn how to have your emotions flow like you do in EBT, you'll be saying angry, you'll be really angry, and what that will do is it'll be a prevention against depression and a way to recover from depression. In other words, if you don't have a robust I feel angry skill, your sadness that will otherwise just fade and be tender and healing gets stuck in this hard depression. And then you're just locked there and you don't know where to go. So be sure, if you're using EBT, to give yourself a lot of patience for 2 things. If you're depressed, it's probably going to be hard for you to really rev up some really robust anger. And so it'll take time, but you will learn it. I promise you, you can learn that. Another thing is you're going to find that you might have some shame, and it'll be hard to feel guilty. Guilt is very important to have. Guilt says, hey, I could have done that differently. There's my power. I'm going to figure it out. Shame is, I'm a bad person. Okay, shame is very, very toxic. So as you learn these emotional processing tools, you're going to be able to be expansive with your emotions, and that stuck feeling of depression is going to begin to get better. So just want to be sure that I feel angry skill is really working well, because it's going to help a lot.
That is really an incredible paradigm shift too, because we do have a lot of hangups around anger, I think, as a culture.
You're right. So just before you go to bed at night, be sure to express 10 angers, but then get your app out and express the sadness, the fear, and the guilt, and it'll turn to a little bit of grateful, happy, secure, proud. So what you're going to do is you're going to be training your brain for joy. You're going to be celebrating. You're going to be celebrating every single speck of joy that you have, but know that this is not a linear process. Development happens in stair steps, spirals, and leaps, and you'll think, I'm never going to feel joy. And all of a sudden say, oh my gosh, I was so happy all day long. And interestingly enough, this happens a lot in EBT, where people have been really in a dark closet, been in a time where they just don't want to go outside. They just feel terrible, and they start to do EBT, and their brain starts to process the emotions, and they start to get up to a little bit of joy here and there. I have one really quick story, which is a woman in my university practice. A young woman, about 28, and she'd had a really, really big history of depression from, she'd been treated since about the age of 6. She's always had a lot of medication. She had a really, really hard time. So she began noticing that her brain could process out of the depression, and she could have her anger, and she wasn't ashamed, and she was feeling good. She comes to the telegroup. I said, what happened? She says, well, I realized I had a day of joy. I got out of the house. I went out and I felt good. I got dressed. I got clean. I went with a friend, and then I went to a social occasion. And she says, and my brain got so freaked out because I was hanging out at 1 or 2 instead of 5. It's just the next day I spent in bed. And she knew enough about the brain to realize that if your reptilian brain is used to owning you by being in the set point of 5 or 4.5, as you start to open up to these beautiful new emotions and ways of processing life, your brain every once in a while will say, I don't think you can be that happy. I don't think that's going to work. And it'll be stressed because you're so happy. And so you just got to develop this really good sense of humor about your reptilian brain. But you know what? Ultimately, we win, because we're going to move the set point up, and the reptile won't be in our lives in the same way as it was before. So got to keep your sense of humor, even though sometimes it's hard.
One of the tools that I like to use is the mindset of curiosity. Just being curious. Okay, I'm just going to use this tool. I'm just going to work through it and just treat it almost like play instead of a task, because my expectations are different
Mm-hmm.
when I go through it in my driven personality, which is the way I like to do things. I like to
Yeah.
drive and accomplish and do, but I want to say that there's a gentleness and a curiosity that will make this process feel less daunting or less intimidating or less like I have to do it right. I think you just have to drop those expectations and just dance with it. Whatever music is playing at the moment, just dance with it.
Whatever music is playing. A nurse practitioner I was just talking to who's doing EBT, and she was saying to me, she says, well, I've had this, I've had several diagnoses for a long time, and I go to therapy, but I need to do that, and I am doing it, and I love my therapist, but it's kind of dreary. And I come to EBT and I'm saying, oh, my reptilian brain is trying to own me right now. Or that sense of playfulness, that's healing too. Because the playful side of us, like you say, the curious side of us, it starts to come alive again in new ways. And so you really just have fun with the process. You can't do this wrong. No matter what you do with the emotional tools, you're going to learn something. And every speck of moment of a little bit of joy is healing, is enormously healing with those natural chemicals.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you again, Dr. Laurel, for bringing your 40 years of experience and research and the collaboration you've done with other amazing minds to come to the place where you can bring an actual brain tool, something that's neuroscience that we can use to have a life that's more balanced, more healthy, more emotionally satisfying, and really learning to embrace all the levels of life, but finding a set point, like you say, that's a little more in service of us as opposed to in damage of us.
Absolutely. Beautifully said, Gina.
All right, awesome. Well, I want to thank you again. And everybody who's watching this video, again, please subscribe to the channel, go down below and click the link to ebt.org. There you will see how you can get involved in the program. The lowest level is only $10 a month. You'll get the opportunity to use the app. You can connect with Laurel, someone on her team, and begin the journey of gaining control of your emotions. And when you gain control of your emotions, you get better control of your life, and you can begin to accomplish the things that you never thought were possible. So thank you again for joining me today, Dr. Laurel. I appreciate all of your wisdom and insight.
Such a pleasure to be with you, as always, Gina.
Thank you, everybody. Don't forget, subscribe down below, click that link, connect with Laurel, start the journey today to healing, to hope, and a life of joy. Thanks so much for joining us.